will work optimally with ongoing collaboration with our group in the project implementation phase. Lessons learned, adaptive NEPA on the front end part of it, the pre-NEPA side, takes time to develop. Our collaborative met for 18 months, working pretty closely together, not only as a group, but we had several subcommittees that kind of split off and were trying to tackle individual questions. You also need to have trust among the collaborative group and your internal specialists that, yeah, we will do what we want, this flexibility, we're going to build it in, but we are going to have this process that we will go through that involves everybody that's interested in being part of it, that will assess what's happening and then make honest and open recommendations on what we need to do differently. We are in the process of identifying if-then statements. Those can be difficult until you actually have kind of the group conversation of what is it we're trying to achieve and what happens if we aren't going there. We need to be able to incorporate the monitoring that then answers those if-then statements. And then you have to have the line officer's commitment for a high level of monitoring and the funding that is needed to do that. Mike, did you want to talk about the iterative NEPA?
Yeah, this would be a good point to jump in on the iterative NEPA. One of the things that we're going to start doing with this EIS is we're going to initiate it with a singular proposed action. So rather than having launching into our analysis with multiple alternatives, we're going to do just a singular proposed action, and then at key points along the path, we're going to modify that proposed action, recording where we've been and capturing that as part of the NEPA process and NEPA record. But then the new modified proposed action becomes, in a sense, the second alternative or the third alternative that we're going to consider through the whole process. What we come out of this with at the other end is one action that the specialists will analyze, and one action that the decision maker will either choose to modify based on what we've seen earlier in some of the earlier proposals, or they'll accept it as is and will move forward with that. And I suspect that because the adaptive management piece is going to follow with that alternative all the way through, that I think our line officer is going to accept the proposed action as is at the end of the process in the final EIS, and then we'll use adaptive management to make the adjustments that we see in implementation. So the iterative NEPA piece just applies during the NEPA process, the year and a half or so that we'll run through that. But what it does is it allows us to stay very focused on the proposed action that we feel is probably the 90% solution and be able to carry that all the way forward.
Okay, so that's it for us. Any clarifying questions?
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah and Mike. So folks can type questions. Looks like we've got a few already, and then you can also ask by raising your hand and ask verbally. But we'll start off with Jared Dahl-Aldern. After implementation of a particular action, how do you assess social acceptance?
So what we're thinking right now, and with the help of the collaborative group, it is going to be, biannual meetings. So this project is part of our CFLR, and we have a very active group called the Landscape Restoration Team that is part of our collaborative. And we meet with them monthly, so there will be that piece of it. There will also be a field trip to look at what has been done and kind of get the feedback from the group on the social acceptance piece, as well as what we're planning to do in the future. As a result of some of the feedback we've had with this group on our field trips, we have been able to modify some of our decisions, not entirely, but some of the projects on the ground where we had the flexibility to kind of adjust actual on-the-ground layout. And I think that model will work. The thing that we need to do, though, is incorporate more folks from just the general walk of life, because our collaborative is built on many agency folks as well as a lot of researchers. And so we need to kind of get more folks engaged that maybe live in the area where we'll be doing these treatments.
One of the other things that we've undertaken is we've built a website specifically for this project that will continue on past the decision process, be modified to allow us to accept comments and questions from the general public, and we can use that as one of our vehicles in evaluating what we're doing, how we're doing it, how what we're doing is perceived by the public, and perhaps use that as a springboard for other public meetings or some other venue for, for public information sharing and comment gathering.
The other piece of it, and we're trying to kind of take our collaborative group that we're working with and not convert them, but apply more of the citizen scientist approach that some of the other CFLR projects have used successfully. And so I think that's the social acceptance piece is going to be evolving. Ultimately, it'll be up to the ranger at that point if he wants to make a change based on what he's hearing from the group. But I think we're just trying to be as inclusive as we can and get as many comments. I also sent Karen the link to our website as it currently exists, so she'll be able to send that out to everybody as well.
Great, thank you. So there's a few more questions. One is, who is part of the collaborative group? And I'm guessing that's included on that website that you sent.
Yeah, everybody that was involved from the beginning of the preparation of the document is listed on that but it's about 40 folks. A few from different walks of life, but like I said, most of them are agency, the Division of Wildlife, the Forest Service, and then a lot of researchers from Colorado State University, Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, as well as some independent folks like Peter Brown from the Colorado Tree Ring Institute. So.
Great. So Dustin had a question about where to find more information on adaptive and iterative NEPA concepts. And so I don't know if you have any resources off the top of your head, but I would invite anyone in the participant list who has some kind of key document or resource they use to type that in, and then I can include that in the follow-up.
There is a working group right now out of the Washington office that is focused on iterative NEPA and looking at our Forest Service regulations and how to discuss that and how to teach that as well. I don't have an access point for them right now, but I know most of the regions, I think, had representatives in that NEPA working group. So if you contact your regional office planning staff, there should be somebody there who's participated in that forum.
There's also the Ecosystem Management Group in the WO that is working on adaptive NEPA. And then Courtney Schultz, who is a researcher at Colorado State University, she's been really helpful in helping us wrap our heads around and try to define the adaptive NEPA piece.
Great. So we'll try to go quickly through these other questions, but you're getting a lot of them here. Do you have trouble with buy-in from collaborative partners when assessing such wide ranges of activity, even though you know that the full range will most likely not be implemented?
Yeah, that has been difficult. I think that there's a particular veg type that we have along the Front Range, that lodgepole pine, that there's still significant disagreement on what we should be doing with that. And in the adaptive process, the continued collaboration piece, they provided us some really good sideboards that made them more comfortable, I think, with the idea of doing treatments up there.
Great. And what concerns did you see in scoping, et cetera, from groups or people who are not part of the collaborative, and is there much resistance from people external to the collaborative to this approach?
Right now, we haven't had much resistance at all. We have had a lot of interest, and there's a number of folks who have already been looking for our public meeting dates and have already questioned whether or not we can do special presentations to their groups and organizations, and we've allowed time for that in our meeting schedule. So I don't know if we're going to see a lot of resistance to it. I think we're going to see a lot of interest in it because we're right in the backyard of Colorado Springs, and a lot of folks, especially after the Waldo fire, are very interested in what we're going to do to help try to protect their communities and their sources of water that come from these mountain areas. So I think interest is high right now. Whether we see resistance or not, that's going to be a little bit farther down the road.
Yeah, we are actually working on our NOI for the Federal Register today, so we haven't officially started scoping.
Okay, great. And one more question. How did you get the tweaks to the proposed action out to the public so that everyone felt they had a chance to comment?
Well, right now, we've been tweaking it internally, trying to create a document that we were comfortable with and that we could put out to the public in the notice of intent. And where we're going to publish that for the public is on our webpage, both the Forest Service webpage and then a project-specific webpage, so that the public can see what it is we're looking to do, and we'll provide details as we develop them on those two websites. And we've got a public comment form that's available on both of those websites so that the public can provide us feedback right away if they want. We'll also have the public meeting notices up on those websites as well as in the local papers. So if they want to come in and talk with us in person, we can accommodate that as well. And then both the websites have got my phone number and my email address, so if they want to send me something directly as the ID team leader, I'd be happy to take that.
The other piece that we've talked about, and obviously since we haven't started scoping, we haven't dealt with this, but if we end up with a significant change, we may go back out and do a significant change to the proposed action. We may go out and do additional public meetings. We may also look at doing something similar to this, like web-based meetings, so that if people want to participate or they want to look at a recording of it. So we're kind of adjusting as we're going.
And that's part of the iterative NEPA process, is looking at the comments that are going to come in during this 45-day public comment period, and whether or not the comments skew us or drive us particularly strong in one direction or another that A, we haven't considered, or B, we still wanted to look forward and analyze, but maybe public resentment against a particular activity or treatment is so strong that it's in our interest at this point to change the way we're looking at that activity within the project. And like Sarah just mentioned, if that is the case, under the iterative NEPA process, we'll make the change in the proposed action, i.e., in other words, creating the second alternative, and we would probably go back out with some more public scoping following that change.
Great. Well, thank you again, Sarah Maben and Mike Picard. That was great. We will move on now to the A to Z Mill Creek Stewardship Project. And Mike North, who's with the team's enterprise unit, will be presenting. And Sarah, you guys can turn off your webcam now and get off the hot seat, and we'll put Mike on the hot seat now, Mike North. So Mike, again, is with Teams, and then we also have on the line Kathleen Ward, who is the Natural Resources Staff Officer for the Colville National Forest. So Mike, you can take it away. But we're not hearing you yet, so don't forget to unmute your phone.
Yeah, I'm Mike North. I'm the Field Operations Director for Teams Enterprise. and I'm also the contracting officer's representative for the Mill Creek A to Z Mill Creek Stewardship Contract. This is on the Three Rivers Ranger District of the Colville National Forest in Washington. This is not a CFLR project. What it is a different way of getting landscape level restoration done. It's a stewardship contract. It's an integrated resource service contract. It's attempting to improve the forest health conditions, have a number of restoration activities such as fish and wildlife habitat restoration. It's a 55,000 acre planting area. The original estimates from the forest was that it would produce about 30 million board feet of timber over the next 10 years. So what's different about this project? The contractor is responsible for preparing the NEPA documents for the project activities. They're going to be using a third party, they are using a third party NEPA contractor to do this. The contractor is also responsible for doing all the pre-sale activities, the layouts, the cruising, the road surveys and designs, and the designs for any of the restoration projects that they identify during the NEPA. The contractor is also responsible for paying for all this NEPA and all these other activities. It's not a bid item in the contract that they're going to get paid for. So essentially, they're upfronting all these costs before they cut the first tree. So what does the contractor get out of it? Once the timber has been laid out and cruised, then the Forest Service will go ahead and appraise the sale, and they will get the timber at the appraised rates, so they don't have to compete for the timber. Also, there's a certain amount of profit built into the restoration activities, to their bids for those activities. So ultimately, down the line, they think they can make it pencil out so that they recoup their investment in the NEPA and the pre-sale. What does the Forest Service get? Stand health improvement, water quality improvement, and fish habitat improvement at a very low cost. Right now I'm estimating it's probably not going to take more than 300 hours of time by the forest employees on this project, at least through the NEPA stage anyway. Where did this start? Well, actually the proposal came from the local sawmill. They wanted to increase their supply of logs from the National Forest. Currently, the National Forest supplies 16%, and they would like to double that. At the same time, the forest is 100% already committed to meeting their targets. They had no additional capacity to have an additional supply. Let's see. So we built this solicitation, and it has a lot of sideboards in it. The Forest Service provides the approval and decisions all along the NEPA process. The NEPA subcontractor does all the work, but at all the key points, the forest supervisor has to approve those key points before they move forward. Other sideboards, the Forest Service provides the check crews, the appraisal, the contract package, and the timber. Those are controls because we want to make sure we get the proper value out of the contract. As I said, the Colville had no resources to move the project forward, so the local congressman added a line item for $300,000 to develop and administer the contract. This is a completely new and different way of proceeding on a project like this, and it actually required Washington office approval. And it took about 1.5 years to develop the solicitation for the contract. Here's the elephant in the room. We have a contractor who's paying the third-party NEPA contractor for their services. The contractor, there's an apparent benefit from the outcome of the NEPA decision. And the contractor serves on the board for the local collaborative group. That's the Northeast Washington Forestry Coalition. So we knew all along that we had an appearance of conflict of interest on this contract. In fact, you can say that it was inherent in the design of the contract. We knew about it while we were building the contract, and we attempted to figure out how to manage that. And the strategy that we've taken is we recognize that there's an appearance of conflict of interest, and we're managing it. In this particular case, the NEPA contractor reports directly to the Forest Service. In fact, they cannot interact with the prime contractor in anything other than matters of billing for their services. We also gave the prime contractor also gave the subcontractor's representative full contractual authority, except for in matters of time and price. So we're basically cutting the prime contractor out of the loop. The prime contractor also agreed that they still wanted to participate in the collaboration, but would refrain from any votes on any issues with this project. Okay, all the communications between the NEPA subcontractor and the contractor have to go through me. So I can keep the pulse on what's going on out there to make sure we don't have a real conflict of interest. Other controls. The forest supervisor has to approve every NEPA step. And all the public meetings are documented in sufficient detail to detect any undue influence from the primary contractor or his employees or his other subcontractors for that matter. And the district ranger is present at every one of these meetings. So the project objective is to provide wood fiber for the economic and social well-being for the surrounding county, to generate revenue to help finance the restoration and post-harvest activities identified within the NEPA document. And that's pretty much what I've got for you, folks.
Great, thank you, Mike. Kathleen, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I just want to add one thing is in your questions you posed to us was what would you do differently in the future? And we will know the answer to that. We have a individual, David C. Schultz of the Pacific Northwest Research Station, who is doing a study on how to measure success with A to Z. In fact, he interviewed a couple folks today. So that question will be answered in full. Thank you.
Excellent. And is he producing a report? Is that kind of an internal learning document, or do you think that'll be something that can be shared?
I believe it can be shared. So it's an analysis, a full analysis.
Great. Good. Okay. Well, let's open it up to clarifying questions first for Mike and Kathleen. Again, you can raise your hands or you can type into the web chat as you've been doing. Don't be afraid to speak up, too. So I was curious, and you may have touched on this, Mike, is have you been hearing from people external to the collaborative group about this process, and in terms of are you fielding a lot of questions where you're explaining some of these firewalls you've set up?
Not yet. We received, in the scoping period, we received 3 or 4 comments that alluded to the conflict of interest. But they were just more questions than anything else that we had to answer. They were just clarification kind of questions. It was really interesting that we didn't get more interest in the conflict of interest portion of it.
Good. Okay, here's a question from Jen Watkins. Who handles the field surveys that inform the NEPA, such as stream surveys, road surveys, wildlife presence, et cetera, that
That's
tends to
being done by the third-party NEPA contractor. He has a number of subcontractors who specialize in that type of work. All of the NEPA documents, and I should clarify this, Teams took the job on to administer this contract. So all the products that are being produced, the analysis methodology, the study plans, everything else has to be concurred with by the Forest Service before they can move forward. So I actually have 11 inspectors in Teams who are handling the inspection portion of the project to make sure that they're following the correct science.
Great. Do you think this, a project like this could be accomplished without a line item in legislation to fund it?
Well, the funding to administer the contract will probably run out in 2.5 years. And so then we'll find out whether the region can come up with additional funding to administer the contract. I would say, when I think about the overall cost, what it will take to administer the contract throughout the length of the contract, you're probably talking between $800,000 and $1 million. When you compare that to the cost of preparing traditional NEPA, just preparing the NEPA itself is probably a good deal, especially when you consider that all the pre-sale activities are being done also.
And is the local mill the Vaughan Brothers mill?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Are the restoration projects part of the NEPA, or will they be done, analyzed later?
No, they are part of the NEPA. The NEPA subcontractor has gone out there and they've identified a number of opportunities that can be, they're going to run all through the same NEPA document.
Great, and here's another question. It appears the outcome over 10 years is expected to be 30 million board feet. Can you put this additional 3 million per year in perspective with the overall harvest of the Colville annually?
I actually don't know what their annual harvest is. Kathleen?
Sure, the annual harvest is 45 million board feet.
Okay. Great. Any other questions on this project in particular? Good. Well, we have three, three really different projects, and I know there's also, I noticed that we have somebody who's involved with the Malheur, the Blue Mountains Restoration Strategy team on the line, which is another really interesting large-scale approach. And we have somebody from the Coconino, and there's the Forest Restoration Initiative down there. So obviously, and there's probably others I didn't pick up on the list. So we have a lot of really great experience on the phone. We're just going to open it up to kind of a general discussion, either for any of the presenters or if somebody wants to share something from their own experience and perspective. So we'll just do it the same way through the web chat and raising your hand. And I do encourage you to raise your hand because then it makes it a more rich conversation. Anyone out there want to share their experience with an innovative approach to NEPA? I see Katie Van Alstyne is underlying having strong leadership support and keeping the team engaged throughout as a critical component, probably to any NEPA, but especially when there's something new being tried. Anyone out there have any last comments or questions? So I see there's a couple people typing. Just a reminder, you can raise your hand. But if we don't have any more questions, we can end a little bit early. I do want to I wanted to let you know there is a peer learning session next week that's being sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Research Station and the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, and we're involved in supporting it. I'll send a message out about that, but so that if you're interested, you can join in. It is focused on learning to understand values and perceptions around ecosystem restoration. So that should be very interesting as well. And if you can just take a minute to fill out the feedback form, we appreciate it. I want to see if there's any final comments from any of our excellent presenters today. I'll start with Katie. Anything you want to add?
Probably the biggest advice is be comfortable being uncomfortable when you're trying something new. The answers may not be readily available, and that's part of the being comfortable being uncomfortable, is that you may not be able to answer all the questions when they're asked, and they will eventually come. And I think these 3 projects are innovative and moving forward in what can be done when we work together across the all lands mantra. That's
Great.
it.
Thank you, Katie. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Easier said than done, right? Good. Okay, well, let's move on to Sarah Mabin and Mike Picard. Any final comments or observations?
No, I agree with Katie. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable is probably the best skill you could have if you're trying something like this. So.
Great, thank you. And Mike North or Kathleen Ward, any final comments?
I'm going to make it a trifecta on that. And the other comment that I had was it was really interesting to see how the subcontractor, the NEPA subcontractor, approached collaboration. It was kind of different than what we expected.
Interesting. So that was like a new player in the collaborative discussion.
Yeah.
And I had just one, Kathleen had one last thing, is what has been essential is the good communication we have between the forest and Mike and the subcontractor. We have calls every other week, and it's just been essential.
Great. Well, thank you. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you. Anyone in the CFLRP program want to make any final comments before we sign off? Okay. And actually, while we're still on, I see there's a question for Mike regarding his comment about how if you could expand on how the contractor approached collaboration differently.
The collaborative group was used to sitting down at the table with the Forest Service and coming up with a proposed action, and really dialing that proposed action in. And often their past NEPA has just had one action alternative because of that. The contractor went out and did the more traditional developing of a proposed action and then presented it to the collaborative group. And then used the comments they got back from the collaborative group to generate some alternatives. So that's what the difference was. And I'm not sure how well the collaborative group liked that approach.
And did it get worked out, or is it still in process?
It's being worked out, but I think the subcontractor is spending a lot more time in meetings with them than they had anticipated. They had to unruffle some feathers, so to speak. And once the collaborative group realized that they were really truly engaged, it calmed down considerably.
Great. Okay, and one last comment from Melanie Lawrence. If you hear it can't be done, and that must mean an innovative approach to NEPA, the message is keep asking why not. Do you folks agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It sounds like as more of these examples come forward, then it will become more of an opportunity to be trying them. And it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of those learning groups on adaptive NEPA and iterative NEPA to help advance use of these in other places. So, okay, well, again, thank you to everybody for your time today. Thank you in particular to our presenters and to Forest Management for their support of this session. And please just take a minute to fill out the feedback form when we end the meeting.